day, and welcome to today's devotional. We are working our way through chapter 7 of Proverbs in the Old Testament of the Bible. Proverbs is a book of wisdom, and it's meant to be a book that's meant to show us God's wisdom. So that includes both pragmatic things and moral things, because they go hand in hand. And so that's what Proverbs is about. We've been working our way through it. And here we are in verse 16. And so we're going to just take a minute and look at an idea that comes out of this. Just to give you the context, once again, there's a little story being told here. So if you've been following along, you'll know this. But if you don't, then there's a little story being told here. A father is instructing his son and trying to warn him against the dangers of falling into an illicit affair with somebody else's wife. And he's saying, stay away from that and to stay true to the teachings to help guard you from falling into this trap. And so he describes a scene of a young man going through the town, finding this woman who comes out to meet him, and they flirt, and she seduces him and takes him home, and it ends up costing him his life because the husband comes home unexpectedly or whatever, and so it's implied that he comes home and the guy ends up getting killed. And so this is being given as a story to say, like, look at this story. This is a bad story. Don't fall into this story. And so we've been looking at each of the verses. When we get to verse 16, we're at the part of the story where the woman is trying to seduce the young man, and she's saying these things to try and draw him in. She's making, so to speak, these arguments. She's listing off things, reasons for him to come home with her. And verse 16, it says, "I have spread my couch with coverings, with colored linens of Egypt." And then it goes on. She talks about how she spread on her bed these scents and stuff, and the various perfumes. And then she goes on and says, let's go home and have an evening doing these things. So anyways, verse 16 is just kind of the build up there to that idea. I have spread my couch with coverings, with colored linens of Egypt. Now at the time, this would have been a kind of an exotic thing to just say, look, I've got this really great place we can go, and it'll be quite an interesting experience. She's painting a picture for him of the fun they're going to have together. And of course, this is the way temptation works, or seduction works. It always paints all the fun parts and kind of keeps out all the terrible consequences, like a sales pitch almost. And so that's what's happening. Now, today, I'd like to just draw from this. I want to go. It's sort of a little rabbit trail. This verse isn't saying exactly what I'm about to say, but it kind of nods to it. It kind of tells us, this is the kind of thing, and that is about how we cover ourselves, how we cover the things in our life, how we present. And so she's talking about her bed being covered with these colored linens, right? All with the purpose of being a seductive thing. And so, just taking that principle in mind. In the future one, as we go down through these verses, we'll get to the whole idea of seduction itself. But for today, this idea of using the presentation things, and in this case, it's a bed, or perhaps what I'll talk about a little bit is just the way we dress ourselves, just the way we present ourselves in the world. And why do we do it? How do we do it? What's the reason behind it? And it's something worth just thinking about sometime, because we don't want to fall into stories like this one. And so we ask ourselves, if everything we do, why do I do it? And well, how do we present ourselves in the world? How do we dress, and why do we dress the way we do? As I said, it's a bit of a rabbit trail, but it's relevant. But ask yourself the question, why do you dress the way you do for whatever it is you're doing? Why do you dress the way you do when you go to work? Why do you dress the way you do when you go to church? Why do you dress the way you do when you go to the beach? Whatever it is, and ask the reason. Why do I do it? Now, you can say, well, the reason anybody dresses is just to protect them from the elements, right? To keep out the cold, to keep out the rain. And of course, in the early days of humanity, that's probably one of the only reasons people ever covered themselves up, was because they wanted to keep out the elements, keep out the cold, and keep out the rain. And so that makes sense. That makes perfect sense. But in our day and age, for sure, that is certainly not the only reason. And you can tell that whenever you drive. I live in Nova Scotia, Canada, and it's Canada, so it gets cold here. We have our fair share of rain, and we have our fair share of snow. And I can argue quite strongly that a lot of people, if not most, actually don't just dress for the rain and the cold. You can tell anytime you drive by a bus stop first thing in the morning, and you see the teenagers standing out at the bus. And they haven't, half of them haven't even got a winter coat with them. They're out there in t-shirts and they're got no hats or mittens on, and they're freezing, but they're not going to put on anything that would ruin the image they have crafted, and so they're not going to put on a big heavy coat. And you can contrast that when you go by a bus stop and see all the little elementary kids whose parents are standing with them, and they're covered head to toe in the thickest of winter gear, mittens and hats and scarves and everything around them, because the parents are dressing them for warmth. And it's funny, but it shows. As we become adults, functionality becomes one of the least reasons why we dress the way we do. But it is something. But another one of the reasons we dress, and this is actually even in the historical record, we can go way back to early, ancient history, early, almost prehistory, and we can see from artifacts we found stuff that people very early on dressed for some sort of social functionality, right? Something to designate a person in some certain way, a headdress or something to show that this person was the chief, or in our own day, uniforms, and somebody dresses a certain way because they're trying to show I'm a fireman, or I'm a policeman, or I'm a doctor, or whatever. And so there's an impressing there. And I don't mean impressing just in the ego sense, but in the sense of trying to give an impression of authority, or an impression of position or status or role. And sometimes that's prideful. Sometimes we want to impress people, not just so that they'll know I'm the guy to turn to, the guy wearing the orange vest and carrying the traffic sign. That's a very functional, very socially functional. But we often will dress to impress people out of pride, right? We'll dress a certain way, like the way I'm dressed here today. Is it just pride? I don't know. I hope not, but it might be. By just wanting to look good. Well, it's not the best reason to dress a certain way, is it? But we fall into that. But the third one, and this is the one that's really, really want to kind of hit today, is the idea of modesty. The original dress in the Bible's account of human history, the first time humans put on clothes, it was out of modesty. It was because they were naked and they didn't want to be naked. And so they put on clothes as a modesty thing. And really, that's a good reason. And we should think about clothing as something to help us be dignified, not prideful, but dignified and modest. And that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. So to relate that to this idea, what happens in the affair, or in the seduction, is that people start to use the way they present themselves as a way to provoke desire. Rather than modesty, or rather than functionality, they will start to use the way they present themselves in order to try and provoke desire in someone else, or we might say lust in someone else. And so dressing a certain way so that you will catch not just the eye of someone, but catch the desire of someone. And this is where we start to get into trouble. And that's where this story is going. As she comes to this man and she says, look, I've covered my couch and all these beautiful, lovely things. Wouldn't it be nice to go and lay on them? And, that's the idea. And as a Christian, or as a person following the wisdom of the Bible, one of the things we have to be careful of is that we're not using the things in our life, the clothes we wear, or the other things in our life, with the goal of attracting lustful desire from people. Now, a few verses from now, we'll talk about the proper place for seduction, and that's in the marriage. That's great. But outside of that, we really shouldn't be in society doing things that try to elicit lust in someone else, either with our behavior or with the way we present ourselves, with our clothing. When you dress, ask yourself that question. Am I dressing for function, or for my position, or out of modesty? Or am I actually hoping that, that guy in class will want me, or that person at work will want me, or that the other people on the beach will look at me and find me desirable? That's a dangerous ground to walk on, and really have to be careful about that, because that just opens the door to this journey of temptation, and it can lead you to very, very bad places. Just a short word on that today. Do with it as you wish, but I would just encourage you to just do a little motive check every now and again and ask yourself, why do you do the things you do? Is it just Is it for innocent reasons, or have you slipped into, well, I kind of like to draw attention to myself. I kind of like to people to want me. Well, that's not going to lead to a good place. You got to be very careful about that. Anyway, that's my opinion. That's the verse for today. Tomorrow we'll see you for Proverbs chapter 7, verse 17. Have a good evening.